Chapter 137. The words of the Shufang of Gojosian made the other 9 vassals fall into silence. We can't do this and we can't do that. Are we supposed to tolerate the Emperor of Tang's probing? The king of Fanyang frowned and said with dissatisfaction. The king of Norland suddenly looked at the Shuafang of Gojosian and asked, "The Shuafang of Gojosian, since you said so, you must have a solution, right?" "I do have a solution." Hearing this, the Shuafang of Gojosian smiled and looked at the other vassals. "We can't kill the Emperor of Tang, but we can teach him a lesson. As long as we let the Emperor of Tang know that it is extremely difficult for him to do anything to us vassals." As soon as the Shuafang of Gojosian finished speaking, the other vassals' eyes suddenly lit up. Indeed, what the Shuafang of Gojosian said made a lot of sense. The Emperor of Tang had always been extremely hostile to the vassals. Killing the Emperor of Tang would not solve any problem at all. Only by making the Emperor of Tang retreat and completely give up the idea of being hostile to the vassals could the problem be solved fundamentally. But how should we teach the Emperor of Tang a lesson? The provincial governor of Norland asked tentatively. The Shufang of Gojosian heard this and did not reply. Instead, he looked at the other vassals. "Over the years, you must have some results from your infiltration of the imperial court." The Shufang of Gojosian's words made all the vassals' faces change. The vassals were in charge of their territories and lived a carefree life far away from the emperor. But the vassals were not fools. Any vassal with a little foresight would know how to rope in the ministers and use them as pawns in the imperial court. In this way, no matter what happened in the imperial court, they would be the first to know. "Shuafang of Gojosian, why are you asking this?" The king of Norland said with great vigilance. The 10 vassals were not united and had some friction with each other. Otherwise, they would not have chosen this place to meet. And the ministers they roped in were top secrets of the vassals. If the news spread and the Emperor of Tang found out, they would be roped in for nothing. It's very simple. Use these pawns to teach the Emperor of Tang a lesson. The Shufang of Gojosian looked at the 9 vassals and said, "Lesson? Please tell me more about it." The vassals looked at each other and asked when they heard this. Inside the palace. Taiji Palace. The Emperor of Gojosian was in high spirits. Was of the to be in the vassal of Gagajosian. Mais of Goi, the Emperor of Gojosian at this moment. A minister stood up, bowed slightly and said loudly, "Your Majesty, the vassals are the foundation of the country. I hope Your Majesty will take back the imperial edict and no longer interfere with the succession of the vassals." After the minister finished speaking, he knelt on the ground and did not get up. The Emperor of Gojosian Li Sheng frowned slightly. He had already expressed his determination some time ago, and now a minister stood up to persuade him. This was something that the Emperor of Gojosian Li Sheng did not expect. Just when the Emperor of Gojosian Li Sheng was about to reprimand the minister, another minister stood up. "Your Majesty, the vassals are the foundation of the country. I hope Your Majesty will take back the imperial edict and no longer interfere with the succession of the vassals." The Emperor of Gojosian Li Sheng frowned and looked at the second minister. Before the Emperor of Gojosian Li Sheng spoke, "Your Majesty, the vassals are the foundation of the country. I hope Your Majesty will take back the imperial edict and no longer interfere with the succession of the vassals." "Your Majesty, the vassals are the foundation of the country. I hope Your Majesty will take back the imperial edict and no longer interfere with the succession of the vassals." More and more ministers stood up and persuaded the Emperor of Gojosian Li Sheng. For a while, in the Taiji Palace, nearly half of the ministers knelt down and begged the Emperor of Gojosian Li Sheng to take back the imperial edict. Most of these kneeling ministers were 7th and 6th rank officials. They were usually very inconspicuous, but at this moment, they all knelt together, and there was an inexplicable momentum. The rest of the ministers who did not kneel saw this scene, and their expressions changed slightly. You. The Emperor of Gojosian Li Sheng's face was extremely ugly. At this moment, how could he not know that these ministers' behavior was hinted by the vassals from all over the country? The vassals were using this method to warn the emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing that if he dared to interfere again, he would lose the throne. Good. You are really good. The emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing suddenly stood up and glared at all the kneeling ministers. I promoted you, put you in an important position, and raised you, but you ran to the vassal's side? The emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing was furious and felt betrayed. Someone come. The prefect of the wonderful pen shop, take them down, take these people down for me. The emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing said word by word. Suddenly, a large number of imperial guards swarmed in and escorted out all the officials who had tried to persuade him. And the court. After this happened, the emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing naturally did not want to continue the court discussion. He waved his sleeves and left the Taiji Palace. In the Palace of Immortals, the emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing sat on the dragon throne. Did I really do something wrong? The emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing fell into self-doubt. If he was an incapable ruler, of course, he would not care about the opinions of his ministers, but the emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing happened to be a wise ruler. He paid great attention to the thoughts of his ministers, but just now, the ministers in the court turned against him, which made the emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing doubt his determination to remove the vassals. Was he really doing the right thing? A few days later, the emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing fell ill in extreme self-doubt. Since the emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing ascended the throne, for nearly 10 years, he had been conscientious and did not dare to have any negligence. Although there was no problem with his body, he had been under great mental pressure for a long time. The betrayal of the ministers was tantamount to the last straw that broke the camel's back. The emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing had a mental breakdown. For a time, the palace was in chaos. Many ministers and Empress Su Yueyun gathered in the Palace of Immortals. After the imperial doctors checked the body of the emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing, they frowned and did not dare to speak. None of the imperial doctors dared to promise that they could cure the emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing. They did not even think of a way to ease the pain of the emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing. Your Majesty, Empress Su Yueyun lay in front of the dragon throne, looking at the unconscious the emperor of Gojoseon Li Xing and wept. At the same time, the vassals who had been paying close attention to the changes in the court immediately learned of this. Ha! You want to do something to us vassals? Wait another 100 years. The king of Norland sneered. The other 9 vassals did the same. The palace. Outside the right spring square. Su Qin put his hands behind his back and scanned the Palace of Immortals with his powerful divine sense. A mental breakdown is not something that can be cured by ordinary medicine, Su Qin thought silently. The problem that the Emperor of Gojoseon was the various hidden dangers caused by a mental breakdown at the moment. If not treated in time, even if he survived, his vitality would be greatly damaged, and it would even affect Shoyun. Forget it. Su Qin sighed softly, took a step and disappeared. The next moment, outside the Palace of Immortals, Su Qin's figure appeared silently. Chapter 138. Outside the Long Life Hall. Su Qin's eyes were calm as he prepared to enter the Long Life Hall. Stop, this is an important place in the palace. A eunuch stood in front of Su Qin and looked at Su Qin warily. However, before the eunuch could finish, he was interrupted. Little de, step aside. This is the imperial uncle. The eunuch who often accompanied the emperor of Tang changed his expression and immediately stopped the eunuch. Imperial uncle? The eunuch was confused, but since the eunuch had said so, he naturally did not dare to continue blocking Su Qin. Imperial uncle? The eunuch looked at Su Qin and said respectfully. Su Qin's expression did not change as he walked into the Long Life Hall unhurriedly. After Su Qin had completely entered the Long Life Hall, the eunuch who stopped Su Qin at first could not help but ask, Imperial uncle? How come I've never seen this imperial uncle before? The young eunuch said carefully. The eunuch glared at the eunuch. There are many things you don't know. If I hadn't stopped you just now, you would have made a big mistake. What? The eunuch was shocked. I'll only say it once. In the entire palace, the imperial uncle is one of the 10 people you can't afford to offend. Do you understand now? A hint of respect flashed in the eunuch's voice. He often followed the emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and naturally knew that in front of Su Qin, the emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, had never acted like an emperor. Moreover, only in front of Su Qin would the emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, show a sincere smile. Based on this point alone, the eunuch knew that Su Qin was definitely one of the people that the emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, valued the most. In addition, Su Qin was the empress's elder brother and Prince Li Yuan's third uncle. With so many identities, even an ordinary noble would not be as good as Su Qin. Within the longevity hall, the ministers were silent, and the atmosphere was heavy. Third brother, why are you here? When Empress Su Yuan saw Su Qin, she immediately stood up and wiped her tears. Third brother? Is he the third son of family Su? Many officials looked at Su Qin and began to discuss in low voices. As important officials of the imperial court, they naturally knew of Su Qin, who had always been holed up in the imperial palace. These officials had always been curious about Su Qin. They knew that given the relationship between the emperor and his family Su, as long as Su Qin said the word, regardless of whether it was entering the court as an official or becoming a general in the army, it was a matter of one word. Power and wealth were at their fingertips. But Su Qin did not. Instead, he stayed in the imperial palace for 10 years, and even rarely left the imperial palace. This made many officials wonder if there really was a saint in the world who did not care about fame and wealth. Su Qin walked to the dragon bed and glanced at the emperor of Tang, Li Sheng. At the moment, the emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was in a coma. His face was pale, and if it weren't for the occasional rise and fall of his chest, he would be no different from a dead man. All of you leave, Su Qin said without looking at the officials. Hearing this, the officials' faces changed. It was not that they did not trust Su Qin, but if they all went out and something happened to the emperor, who would be responsible? Prince Li Yuan was still young and could not bear the heavy responsibility of the country. Only Empress Su Yueyun was refreshed. Since Su Qin asked the others to go out, it meant that he had a way to save the emperor of Tang. Su Yueyun trusted Su Qin very much. If it weren't for Su Qin, she would probably still have Yin Qi in her body and could not give birth to a dragon child. Since the third brother asked us to go out, let's go out. Empress Su Yueyun looked at the officials and said, Empress, this is against the rules. Some of the officials could not help but ask. Against the rules? Empress Su Yueyun frowned and said coldly, if anything happens, I will take responsibility. Is this against the rules? The officials looked at each other and could only bow and say, yes. Su Yueyun, the officials, eunuchs, and maids all left the Palace of Immortals and waited outside. For a moment, only Su Qin, the Emperor of Tang, and Li Sheng were left in the huge Palace of Immortals. I asked you to wait. Why are you in such a hurry? Su Qin raised his right hand, and a trace of true essence entered the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's body. In an instant, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's body trembled, and his exhausted body suddenly began to recover quickly. Arhat's true essence had the effect of changing the body and cleansing the marrow. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's body at this moment, withstanding a trace of Arhat's true essence, was like a sweet dew after a long drought. Even his pale face began to turn red. However, Su Qin did not stop. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, had a mental breakdown, not a physical one. The next moment, Su Qin stretched out his index finger and slowly pressed it between the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's eyebrows. Clang! As if a bronze bell rang, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, felt himself suddenly awaken from a daze. This is... The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, suddenly opened his eyes. Third brother. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, saw Su Qin and relaxed. A moment later, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, said weakly, it seems that third brother saved me. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, although unconscious, had a vague perception of the outside world and knew that Su Qin had come to save him. It's nothing. Su Qin shook his head slightly and looked at the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and said, you've been on the throne for almost 10 years. Although you seem to be calm, In fact, you haven't suffered any setbacks. Third brother taught me a lesson. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, smiled bitterly. At this moment he also realized where his problem was. Su Qin glanced at the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and turned to walk out of the longevity hall. After Su Qin left, many ministers immediately rushed in. Your Majesty! Your Majesty, are you okay? When the ministers saw that the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, had woken up, they were so excited that they burst into tears. Empress Su Yueyun's face was full of joy. Your Majesty, can we take a look at your body? At this moment, a royal doctor who looked very old-age said, Take a look. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, nodded slightly. A moment later, the royal doctor finished looking at the Emperor of Tang's body, and his face was full of disbelief. Impossible. How is this possible? Full of essence, qi, and spirit. How did this happen? The old-age royal doctor's face was full of shock. In his eyes, even if the Emperor of Tang woke up, it would take some time for him to recover. But at this moment, the Emperor of Tang's body and spirit couldn't be any better. What kind of medical skill is this? The old-age royal doctor was dumbfounded and in disbelief. After Su Qin saved the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, he returned to the right spring square again. It's about time. I can start breaking through. Su Qin sat cross-legged and made a decision in his heart. Since reaching level 4 complete a few months ago, Su Qin had been adjusting his state, and now it was about time. Thinking of this, Su Qin slowly closed his eyes, and the aura in his body began to rise and circulate. Half a day later, Su Qin's aura began to calm and contract, as if it was condensed to a point. Whoosh! A terrifying aura soared into the sky, almost breaking through the barrier of the heaven and earth great array in the right spring square. I've finally reached level 5. Su Qin opened his eyes, and his mind entered his body, carefully feeling the changes in his body. Chapter 139. Not bad. After stepping into the 5th heaven, whether it's the physical body, true essence, or divine sense, they have all increased by several times. Su Qin nodded slightly, his thoughts fluctuating. The improvement from the 4th heaven to the 5th heaven was not as qualitative as the breakthrough from the 3rd heaven to the 4th heaven, but it still made Su Qin very satisfied. After all, at his level, even the slightest bit of improvement was extremely difficult, let alone crossing over to the next realm. After the 5th heaven, it's the 6th heaven. As for the 7th heaven above the 6th heaven, it can be considered the true peak of the Venerable Arhat. Su Qin touched his chin, his thoughts wandering. According to what Su Qin learned from the moon worship's moon goddess, even in the depths of the endless ocean, the 7th heaven mythical realm was extremely rare. Even if they existed, they would pursue the illusory path of the land immortals and would not show their traces in front of outsiders. It's said that only by reaching the 7th heaven Arhat can there be hope of condensing a miniature domain. Su Qin thought silently in his heart. Whether it was the Venerable Arhat or the martial arts legends, the biggest difference between them and the martial arts 9 grades was the control of the power of heaven and earth. However, the power of heaven and earth was vast and boundless. Even the invincible 9th heaven Arhat could not control all of the power of heaven and earth. Therefore, the cultivation at the later stage of Arhat's level was to constantly compress and condense the power of heaven and earth that one controlled to form a miniature domain. The miniature domain might not be comparable to the power of heaven and earth in terms of range, but in terms of quality, it far surpassed the power of heaven and earth. However, to compress and condense the power of heaven and earth was tantamount to fighting against the heaven and earth. How difficult was that? Even the Venerable Arhat of the 7th heaven only had hope of condensing a miniature domain. As for whether one could successfully condense it, it depended on whether one's foundation was strong enough. The one who had a miniature domain must be the Venerable Arhat of the 7th heaven. However, the Venerable Arhat of the 7th heaven did not necessarily have a miniature domain. Forget it, it's too early for me to think about this. Su Qin shook his head and sighed. Now, he had just entered the 5th layer of Arhat. He was still some distance away from the 6th layer of heaven, not to mention the 7th layer of heaven. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, seems to be recovering well. Su Qin raised his head slightly and looked in the direction of the Longevity Temple. At this moment, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was leisurely eating the food prepared by the imperial chef. Obviously, he had recovered from the betrayal of his subjects. When Su Qin saw this, a smile appeared on his face. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was Su Qin's brother-in-law, but he was also the Emperor of the Empire of Tang. For the sake of his younger sister, Su Yueyun, when the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was in mortal danger, Su Qin would lend a helping hand. But in other matters, Su Qin was not willing to interfere. Otherwise, whenever the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng was in trouble, Su Qin would lend a hand. Then what was the point of cultivating? There were billions of living beings in the Empire of Tang, and there were so many big and small matters every day. If Su Qin took care of everything, he would probably not be able to cultivate to the Earth Immortal realm even if he died of old age. Su Qin stayed in the palace, and he valued the peace and quiet here. If he got involved in the political affairs of the Empire of Tang, wouldn't it be the opposite of him? Besides, Su Qin had done enough for the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng. If it weren't for Su Qin, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, would have died in the hands of assassins when he was in the family Su. Not to mention the rebellion of Prince Sun, which was also quelled by Su Qin. Su Qin saved the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, 3 times, and even helped him ascend to the throne. This was enough to offset the fact that he was borrowing the sign in from the imperial palace. For the next period of time, I will go into seclusion to stabilize the 5th heavenly layer. Su Qin's thoughts turned quickly, and he made a decision in his heart. During the seclusion, Su Qin put a wisp of his mind on the family Su and the Emperor of Tang to ensure that their lives would not be in danger. As for other things, he completely put them down. And just when Su Qin began his seclusion, within the Empire of Tang, waves were brewing. Since the 10 kings secretly instigated their ministers to defect to the Emperor of Tang, and after learning that the Emperor of Tang fell ill, they became even more arrogant. The Jiannan king even mocked the Emperor of Tang in public. When the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, learned of this news, his expression did not change at all. Instead, he did what he should do. This move made the 10 kings feel that the Emperor of Tang was admitting defeat. For a time, the power of the kings in the Empire of Tang was monstrous. Time slowly passed by. 2 years passed in a blink of an eye. In these 2 years, the kings became more and more confident. The Anxi king even asked the Emperor of Tang for another piece of land. When this matter spread to the imperial court, it directly made all the civil and military officials indignant. The territories of the 10 vassal kings together accounted for nearly 1/5 of the entire territory of the Tang Empire. If they were to give out more land, wouldn't they have to give away half of the Tang Empire? Moreover, once this began, the kings would do it a second time and a third time. At that time, the Empire of Tang might have to change its name directly. However, at this time, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, ordered the Forbidden Army to directly fire all the spy strongholds from the 10 kings in Xianxia City. In addition, all the ministers who had a little relationship with the 10 kings, regardless of their official position, were arrested. It turned out, in these 2 years, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, did not do nothing. Instead, he secretly investigated all the spies and chess pieces arranged by the 10 kings in Xianxia City. Until today, when the 10 kings were most arrogant, he quickly took action and removed all the spies buried by the 10 kings in Xianxia City. And the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's action was very successful. 2 years of forbearance in exchange for an outbreak, which directly stunned the 10 kings. It was still in the small town. The 10 kings gathered here again. What happened? Didn't the Emperor of Tang admit defeat? Why did I lose contact with all the spies I put in Xianxia overnight? The Jiannan king looked extremely ugly and almost roared out. You ask me, how do I know? The Hudong king also looked gloomy and impatient. He was still worried about the chess pieces he buried in Xianxia City. How could he pay attention to the Jiannan king's words? We've lost the trouble. Without the spies and spies, we kings are like blind men who know nothing about Xianxia City. The Fanyang king sighed and looked at the other kings. What should we do now? As expected, the emperor of Tang is vicious. 2 years ago, when he fell ill because of anger, I was still wondering if it was true. Now, it seems that it was a deliberate fake news to make us lower our guard and reveal flaws. The Shuofang king of Gojoseon sighed softly. If the vassals also realized the seriousness of the matter, once the spies buried in Chang and were removed, they would not be able to know anything about Chang. It was tantamount to having a knife hanging over their heads, and they did not know when it would fall. Just when these kings were at a loss, a voice suddenly sounded. It's very simple. You can directly rebel against the Emperor of Tang. Chapter 140. It's very simple. You can directly rebel against the Emperor of Tang. As soon as these words came out, the 10 kings on the field were suddenly shocked. Who is it? The Shuofang of Gojoseon looked dignified and kept looking around. The other 9 kings were the same, because the voice that suddenly sounded just now did not belong to any of them. Don't be afraid. I have no malice. At this time, a man in a white robe with an indifferent expression slowly walked out and stood in front of the 10 kings. Who are you? How do you know this place? The Shuofang of Gojoseon looked at the indifferent man and said word by word. Only the 10 kings knew about this town, and it has long been surrounded by many of the king's subordinates and confidants, and no one is allowed to enter. The indifferent man was able to sneak in quietly. He is at least a peak grade 1 great grandmaster. You don't need to know who I am. You just need to know that I am here to help you. The indifferent man showed a smile on his face and said, Help us? The 10 kings looked at each other, and their thoughts turned quickly. If it was someone else who dared to say this in front of the 10 kings, they would have already been taken down. But the indifferent man can appear here, in the hearts of the kings. His means are absolutely unfathomable, and he is a peak grade 1 great grandmaster. Such a powerhouse's words are naturally persuasive. Help us? How are you going to help us? The Shuofang of Gojoseon was silent for a while and asked. It's very simple. The indifferent man looked at the Shuofang of Gojoseon. The reason why you don't dare to rebel against the Emperor of Tang now is that you are worried about the Li royal ancestor in the Emperor of Tang's palace. The indifferent man paused and continued, But now, the ancestor in the Emperor of Tang's palace, just leave it to us. We. The Shuofang of Gojoseon keenly grasped the word, we, in the indifferent man's words. How can we trust you? The Shuofang of Gojoseon was very vigilant. Although he already had some guesses in his mind, he still wanted to know the exact answer. The Emperor of Tang's palace. Su Qin finally walked out of the right spring square. In these 2 years, not only have I stabilized my cultivation at the 5th heavenly layer, but I've also improved further. Even if I'm not at the peak of the 5th heavenly layer, I'm not far from it. Su Qin walked unhurriedly through the Eastern Palace as he thought to himself happily. Let's see what happened in the past 2 years. Su Qin released his divine will, which swept across Chang'an city in an instant. The Emperor of Tang has finally learned to endure? Su Qin only needed to use his divine sense to roughly understand what had happened recently. It was nothing more than the Emperor of Tang removing all the spies and chess pieces of the vassals overnight. That's a qualified emperor. Su Qin nodded slightly. It was obvious that the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, had made rapid progress. At least, he knew when to endure and when to explode. Third uncle. You're out? At this time, Princess Li Wan saw Su Qin and immediately shouted loudly. In the past 2 years, Su Qin was either in seclusion or signing in. As for other things, he didn't care about them. Even if the Emperor of Tang came looking for him sometimes, he might not be able to see him. Third uncle. Princess Li Wan trotted to Su Qin, waved her fist, and said proudly, Third uncle, look, I'm already a rank 9 martial artist. If it was someone else in the palace, a rank 9 martial artist might not be worth mentioning, but Princess Li Wan wasn't even 10 years old. To be able to develop inner force and become a rank 9 martial artist at this age, in addition to the abundant martial arts resources in the palace, it was also because of Princess Li Wan's own talent and hard work. Not bad. Su Qin just came out of seclusion and was in a good mood. He said casually, "If you have any questions about martial arts in the future, you can come to me." Really? Princess Li Wan's eyes suddenly widened. After chatting with Princess Li Wan for a while, Su Qin walked out of the East Palace and strolled around the palace. Speaking of which, it's been a while since I signed in at the Ancestral Temple. When Su Qin passed by the Ancestral Temple of the palace, he suddenly stopped and thought. Su Qin glanced at the guardian outside the Ancestral Temple and slowly walked to the front of the Ancestral Temple. System, sign in. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated, and he muttered in his heart, "Congratulations to the host for signing in successfully. You have received 9 Yao Bao." A cold, mechanical voice sounded in Su Qin's ears. 9 Yao Bao? Su Qin's heart skipped a beat. He has signed in at the palace for more than 10 years, and most of the treasures he signed in were divine arts, pills, and spiritual kingdoms. Treasures like 9 Yao Bao that sound like a weapon are rare, and there are only a few hundred of them. I'll go back and take a look. After signing in, Su Qin's goal was achieved and he returned to the East Palace. In the right spring square, Su Qin sat cross-legged, his mind integrated into the system space. In a corner of the system space, an illusory bao made entirely of divine light slowly swayed. This is the 9 Yao Bao? Su Qin looked a little surprised. The 9 Yao Bao gave him the feeling that it didn't exist at all. Where's the arrow? Since it's a bao, why is there no arrow? Su Qin frowned and his mind began to slowly integrate into the 9 Yao Bao. In an instant, all kinds of information flooded into his mind. After a while, Su Qin slowly opened his eyes. Using divine sense as a guide and world's essence qi as an arrow, the arrow will kill. This is the 9 Yao Bao? Su Qin's thoughts were fluctuating. According to the information in the 9 Yao Bao, one must at least have the divine sense of a venerable arhat to be able to pull the 9 Yao Bao. And the power displayed by the 9 Yao Bao depends on the user's divine sense. In other words, the stronger the divine sense, the power of the 9 Yao Bao will skyrocket without limit. This 9 Yao Bao has already transcended matter. It's completely a spiritual treasure. Su Qin looked amazed and muttered to himself. Whether it's the spirit or divine sense, they are all illusory and have no substance. Even if there is a spiritual secret technique like moon forging divine sense, Su Qin can roughly understand it. The Shao booking, Shao shutting, that the readers used to use before had already died. Now, they were basically using the Mommy reading app. After all, at his level, he can barely see the reorganization and dispersion of the divine sense. Even if there is no moon-forging divine sense, sooner or later, Su Qin will figure out other secret techniques to forge divine sense. It's just that this 9 Yao Bao, until now, Su Qin still doesn't know what kind of material the 9 Yao Bao is made of, no matter what. The 9 Yao Bao is mine. Su Qin calmed down and stopped thinking about it. Anyway, now that the 9 Yao Bao has recognized him as its master, as long as Su Qin is willing, he can pull the bao at any time, and that's enough. Taiji Palace. The Emperor of Tang Lixing is discussing state affairs with the civil and military officials. Suddenly, at this moment, a forbidden army soldier hurried over and knelt on the ground with a plop. "Your Majesty, there is an urgent report from the border." "Speak." The Emperor of Tang Lixing's expression froze and said, "Your Majesty, the 10 vassal kings suddenly joined forces and led an army of millions towards Chang." As soon as this came out, the Emperor of Tang Lixing's expression changed drastically. Showbiges, opening sign in Buddha's palm. Chapter 141. In the Taiji Palace. When they heard that the 10 kings were going to attack Chang, and with millions of troops, everyone was shocked. Many ministers did not expect that the 10 kings would dare to rebel like this. How is it possible? The Emperor of Tang Lixing was shocked and puzzled at the same time. In the past few years, he also had some understanding of the 10 kings. Although the 10 kings seemed to be united on the surface, in fact, there were many contradictions between them and no one trusted each other. If the Emperor of Tang Lixing openly forced them, the 10 kings might join forces against a common enemy, but the Emperor of Tang Lixing did not force them too much. He just pulled out the spies that the kings had placed in Chang'an. Although it seemed to have a great impact on the kings, in fact, it did not hurt them. After all, the foundation of the kings was in their own fiefdoms. As long as the Emperor of Tang Lixing did not reach their fiefdoms, everything could be saved. Although the kings were ambitious, they did not dare to rebel openly, because it was equivalent to completely falling out with the Empire of Tang, and there was no room for maneuver. It would be good if they succeeded. What if they failed? The kings did not dare to gamble at all. What was the reason that made the vassal kings so determined to rebel? The Emperor of Tang Lixing subconsciously noticed that there was something wrong, but he could not figure it out. Your Majesty, what should we do now? At this time, a minister stood up and asked with a worried face. What should we do? The Emperor of Tang Lixing suddenly stood up, and a trace of coldness appeared on his face. Since they want to fight, then I will fight with them. If the kings did not rebel, Lixing did not mind spending decades to slowly remove the king's wings and finally cut off the vassals. But now, the kings had already mobilized millions of troops and were about to attack Cheng. The Emperor of Tang Lixing had no other choice. If he flinched at this time, he would not only lose face for himself, but also the face of the Li royal family. Minister of War. The Emperor of Tang, Lixing, turned his gaze to the Minister of War. Your subject is here. The Minister of War stepped forward and bowed. Assemble the army. The Emperor of Tang, Lixing, said in a deep voice. As you command. The Minister of War bowed. Oh, the triplets are here. Outside Right Spring Square. Third uncle. Princess Li Yuan stood there and shouted towards the Right Spring Square. Why you here? Su Qin walked out, glanced at Princess Li Yuan, and asked casually. Didn't third uncle say that he could come over if he had any questions regarding martial arts? Princess Li Yuan blinked her big eyes and said pitifully, could it be that third uncle has forgotten? Okay, ask away. Su Qin shook his head. He didn't know where Princess Li Yuan learned to act like a spoiled child from. He remembered that his little sister Su Yuan didn't know how to do this, right? Did Li Yuan learn martial arts? Su Qin asked. Li Yuan was the son of Lixing, the Emperor of Tang, and the future crown prince. Unlike Princess Li Yuan was very afraid of Su Qin. When he saw Su Qin, he was like a mouse seeing a cat. He has no interest in martial arts at all. I don't even want to talk to him. Princess Li Yuan shook her head like a little adult. Yesterday I beat him up and told him to fight with me for delicious food. Su Qin was speechless when he heard that. However, although Princess Li Yuan had just entered the 9th level, she had no problem beating up a child less than 10 years old like Li Yuan. Tell me about your doubts. Su Qin didn't continue to talk about other topics and said directly. Third uncle, every time I circulate my martial arts, I feel a little sluggish. I've asked a few eunuchs, but they don't know what's wrong. They just let me try a few more times. Princess Li Yuan looked at Su Qin expectantly. For as long as she could remember, Su Qin had always stayed in the Right Spring Square as if he had never left. Even her father respected Su Qin very much. He didn't see Su Qin as an ordinary person at all. Therefore, in Princess Li Yuan's heart, Su Qin should be a great expert. Try to circulate your martial arts now. Su Qin glanced at Princess Li Yuan. He had a rough idea of the reason, but he still let her circulate her martial arts for a while. Princess Li Yuan immediately sat cross-legged on the ground and circulated her martial arts slowly. In less than a moment, Su Qin stopped her. You should change your cultivation technique. Su Qin said. The problem faced by Princess Li Yuan is that her cultivation technique is not compatible with her own physique. Of course, the incompatibility here is extremely slight. Even a grade 1 great grandmaster would find it difficult to detect. But in Su Qin's eyes, it's natural for him to see it. Change my cultivation technique. Princess Li Yuan was puzzled. The cultivation technique she cultivates is already the best cultivation technique in the entire palace of the Emperor of Tang. If she wants to change it, she really doesn't know which one to change. Wait a minute. Su Qin glanced at Princess Li Wan and turned back to the right spring square. Su Qin walked out, holding a piece of paper with wet ink in his hand. You can cultivate according to this. Su Qin asked casually. On the paper was a cultivation technique Su Qin has obtained in the past few years. Although it is not as good as the other cultivation techniques Su Qin obtained, it is the most suitable cultivation technique for Princess Li Wan's physique. Princess Li Wan took the paper and looked at it carefully. Suddenly, her eyes widened in disbelief. Although she is only a grade 9 martial artist, Princess Li Wan can faintly perceive that the cultivation technique Su Qin gave her seems to be much better than all the cultivation techniques in the Imperial Palace. Remember, on the path of martial arts, step by step is the most important. Don't be impatient. After Su Qin gave a few words of advice, he let Princess Li Wan go back. After Princess Li Wan left, Su Qin turned his eyes and looked in the direction of the border. The 10 vassal kings joined forces and sent millions of troops? Su Qin frowned slightly. Since the news came out in the morning, Xianxia and City has been in a state of panic, and even people in the Imperial Palace are gossiping. At the same time, thousands of miles away from Xianxia and City, millions of vassal kings' troops are camping here. And behind the army, the 10 vassal kings gathered in a military camp. My lord, we've already done as you said. When the army arrives at Xianxia and City, the old monster in the Imperial Palace will be handed over to you. Jianan King looked at the indifferent man not far away, and his tone was slightly respectful. The other 9 vassal kings also showed respect when they heard this. If it weren't for the indifferent man revealing his identity, they would never dare to risk it all and rebel. The vassal kings are independent. Although they nominally listen to the orders of the Emperor of Tang, in fact, they are a country of China. Glory, wealth, power, and beauties they can enjoy for generations. Under this premise, how could the vassal kings dare to take the risk of rebellion? But the benefits given by the indifferent man were too great, and the vassal kings felt that the rebellion would not fail, so they gambled everything. Chapter 142. Don't worry. The indifferent man shook his head slightly. The indifferent man's performance was tantamount to giving the kings infinite confidence. At this moment, even if they were in the army, they began to talk and laugh. However, speaking of which, the Empire of Tang really has some heritage. There is an ancestor hidden in the Imperial Palace. If it weren't for Sir, we really wouldn't dare to rebel. A smile appeared on the Fanyang King's face as he said with emotion. Indeed, after all, the empire has been established for more than 500 years. The other kings felt the same way and kept nodding. When we arrive at Xianxia and City, it will be fine if the Grand Master of the Tang Imperial Palace does not appear. But if he does, with my lord holding him back, we can let our million-strong army exhaust him to death. A trace of ruthlessness appeared on the biting king's face. In this world, martial artists are rampant, but the countries are still above martial artists. Why is this? Of course, it's because of the army. Under the legend realm, even if a peak grade 1 great grandmaster is trapped in an army of millions, they will be exhausted to death. Of course, no peak grade 1 great grandmaster will take the initiative to jump into an army of millions. With the terrifying speed of a peak grade 1 great grandmaster, if they want to escape, it is impossible for an army of millions to catch up. But the premise of all this is that there is no other peak grade 1 great grandmaster to stop them. If there is a peak grade 1 great grandmaster, then with an army of millions, it will be a real inescapable net for any peak grade 1 great grandmaster. When we break through Xianxia and City, I will personally cut off the Emperor of Tang's head and let him know that we kings are not at his mercy. The Jianan King sneered. Okay. Have you thought about how to divide the country after destroying the Empire of Tang? At this time, the indifferent man suddenly said, Divide the country. As soon as these words came out, the eyes of the 10 kings suddenly became fiery. Wasn't the reason why they risked rebellion for this moment? Sir, we have thought about it. When the time comes, we will divide the Empire of Tang equally. The king of Gojoseon's eyes flashed and said respectfully to the indifferent man. Equally. The indifferent man looked at the other vassals with a faint smile. If it was something else, they could split it equally. However, who wouldn't want to own the entire country? The Emperor of Tang's palace. Taiji Palace. Some soldiers brought in information from the front lines. There seems to be a grade 1 Great Grandmaster in the Qing Coalition army? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, glanced at him. And there's more than one? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked extremely solemn. Although he had long guessed that there must be some reason for the sudden rebellion of the 10 kings, the biggest possibility was that they had some kind of confidence. However, the Emperor of Tang and Li Sheng did not expect that the other party's backing was actually more than one peak grade 1 Great Grandmaster. It must be known that even when the Emperor of Tang was alive, the only peak grade 1 Great Grandmaster in the Empire of Tang was Eunuch Xiao. Order all troops to retreat and do not contact the other party. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, although this is equivalent to giving up part of the territory of the Empire of Tang and letting the Qing Coalition army pressure the border, there is no other way. The other party has a grade 1 Great Grandmaster, coupled with an army of millions. Ordinary the Empire of Tang's army can't resist at all. In that case, why not gather all forces and fight to the death outside Chang'an city? Although the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, knows that there are powerhouses in the imperial palace, but since the kings dare to rebel, they must have expected this and even thought of a way. After all, it is no secret that the powerhouse in the Emperor of Tang's palace has taken action several times. Although the kings are ambitious, they are not fools. Before the rebellion, they must have weighed the pros and cons. After confirming that they have the confidence, they will start the rebellion. Right Spring Square. Empress Su Yueyun's face was full of worry. Third brother, recently His Majesty has been unable to sleep because of the rebellion. Empress Su Yueyun sighed softly. I also heard about this. Su Qin nodded slightly and said casually, but you don't have to worry, everything will be over soon. It will be over soon. Empress Su Yueyun wanted to laugh, but she couldn't. Empress Su Yueyun knows the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng very well. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, wouldn't be unable to sleep all night if he had the confidence. Third brother. I'm here to discuss something with you. Empress Su Yueyun thought for a while and said carefully. What is it? Su Qin was slightly surprised. It was the first time he saw his little sister talk to him in such a tone. Tonight, can you take 1 yuan out of Chang'an city? Su Yueyun's eyes were red. Leave Chang'an city? Su Qin immediately understood what Su Yueyun was worried about. The 10 kings had millions of troops, and the situation of the Empire of Tang was not optimistic. If Chang'an city was finally breached, Su Qin could escape with Li Wan and Li Yuan. Don't worry. Su Qin smiled and said, go back and sleep, and everything will be fine when you wake up. I hope so. Empress Su Yueyun sighed softly and said a few more words to Su Qin before leaving the Right Spring Square. After Su Yueyun completely disappeared, Su Qin slowly walked out of the Right Spring Square and looked up in the direction of the king's army. Rebellion? Millions of troops? There was an inexplicable vortex slowly rotating in Su Qin's pupils. The eye of truth opened instantly and observed the qi of heaven and earth. With the help of the celestial qi refining technique, Su Qin could instantly see through half of the Empire of Tang. If the 10 kings stayed in their respective territories, I wouldn't bother to do anything. Su Qin looked calm. But now you want to rebel? Su Qin's eyes were deep. Found you. Su Qin seemed to have found something and instantly locked onto a position thousands of miles away. Su Qin took a step forward, stretched out his right hand, and slightly grasped the void. Layers of divine light gathered. In an instant, a bow-shaped void completely composed of divine light appeared in Su Qin's hand. The next moment, Su Qin held the bow in his right hand and put his left hand on the string. Bang! The bow was drawn to a full moon. Boom! The world's essence qi within a few miles and dozens of miles suddenly became violent, forming a monstrous wave of world's essence qi that continued to rush towards Su Qin. To be precise, it was converging towards the 9-yao bao in Su Qin's hand. This scene was extremely shocking. A terrifying aura spread across dozens of miles in an instant. All the martial artists in the upper realm felt a great sense of oppression descending. That is, outside the Imperial Palace Ancestral Temple, the temple keeper's face changed wildly. At this moment, he could almost feel that the world's essence qi was completely out of control and was rushing towards the Imperial Palace. What the hell is going on? The temple keeper was shocked and trembled all over. Not only the temple keeper, but the dozens of Grade 1 great grandmasters in the Imperial Palace were also terrified. At this moment, they seemed to be facing the true power of heaven and earth. And at this time, in front of the right spring square, Su Qin held the 9-yao bao in his right hand and pulled the bowstring with his left hand. Endless world's essence qi gathered and formed an illusory arrow on the 9-yao bao. As soon as the arrow was formed, it quickly condensed from illusory to real. A trace of shocking killing intent lingered and collided on the arrow, bursting out countless flashes of light more terrifying than thunder and lightning. Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks, your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best Wuxia and Xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, Martial World, and tales of demons and gods.